On my 18th birthday, I didn't get a cake or balloons or even a card. What I got was the truth. A truth that cut through everything I thought I knew about my life. For 18 years, I believed I had a family. I believed Beverly and Harold Reed were my parents. But that morning, in the same kitchen where I ate dinner every night, I found out I had only ever been a paycheck to them. The day started quietly. Beverly sat at the table with her calculator, pressing the buttons like she always did. Harold sat across from her with his usual cup of coffee, staring down like he didn't want to be there. I walked in and waited, hoping someone would smile, maybe even say, "Happy birthday." But Beverly didn't look up. She just said, "Sit down, Colton." Her voice had no warmth, like she was talking to a stranger. When I sat, she pushed a piece of paper toward me. It had rows of numbers. At the bottom was $1,500. Per month, she said, clicking the calculator again. "That's what we got for you. The subsidy. But today it ends." I stared at her, not understanding. "What subsidy?" I asked. Harold shifted in his chair, still not looking at me. Beverly finally looked up, her gray eyes cold. "The state paid us to take care of you. Food, shelter, school. We met our obligation. But now that you're 18, the checks stop. So do you." At first, I thought it was a bad joke. I even waited for Harold to laugh and say it wasn't serious. But then Beverly pointed to a black garbage bag leaning against the wall. "Your belongings are in there. Clothes you bought yourself, a few personal items. Everything else stays here." The room felt like it was closing in on me. "You're really telling me this? Today?" My voice cracked. Harold finally spoke, his tone weak. "That was always the deal, son. The checks stop at 18. The deal." The word echoed in my head. I wasn't their son. I was a deal. I stood up because sitting there felt impossible. "I don't have anywhere to go," I said. "I've only got $47. Where am I supposed to live?" Beverly opened a folder, pulled out a pamphlet and slid it across the table. The address was highlighted. "There's a shelter downtown. They take 18 and older." She said it like she was giving me directions to the grocery store. I hated myself for it, but I begged. "Please, just give me a week. I'll pay rent." Beverly shook her head. "With what? That little job at the garage? 30 hours at minimum wage won't cover rent." Harold suddenly stood up, grabbed his keys and walked to the door. "Good luck, Colton," he said softly. Then he left, the sound of his truck starting filling the silence. I picked up the garbage bag. It was so light it almost slipped from my hand. 18 years of my life, and it fit into one plastic bag. No family photos. No birthday cards. Nothing that proved I had ever belonged. "Did you ever think of me as your son?" I asked Beverly. She checked the clock and went back to her calculator. We met the terms. And just like that, I knew my childhood had ended. When the clock hit noon, Beverly stood up and walked to the door. She didn't even look at me when she said, "Leave the keys on the counter. The house will be locked when I leave." Then she pulled out her phone and started making a call, like I wasn't even standing there. I picked up the garbage bag and stepped outside. The air was warm, but I felt cold. The house I had lived in for 18 years stood behind me, but it never really felt like mine. Now I knew why. I walked down the sidewalk, the bag cutting into my hand. My whole body felt heavy, but the bag felt light, almost like proof of how little I truly had. Neighbors were mowing their lawns, kids were riding bikes, families were laughing. To them, it was just another Saturday. To me, it was the day my life ended and started at the same time. I didn't know where to go. I only had $47 in my wallet. I looked at the pamphlet Beverly gave me. The shelter was downtown, at least an hour's walk. I didn't even own a car. I had been saving for community college, but that money was barely $800. Not nearly enough for rent anywhere. So I walked. Every step felt unreal, like I was walking out of a dream I hadn't realized was fake until now. My shoes rubbed against my heels and sweat ran down my back, but I didn't stop. I thought about Harold. He had taught me how to fix engines, change oil, patch drywall. For years I thought those lessons were his way of caring. Now I wondered if it was just his way of keeping me busy. I thought about Beverly's hands. Hands that had packed my school lunches and signed my report cards. But now I knew she had done it because the state required it, not because she cared. By the time I reached downtown, my feet ached and my mouth was dry. I stood outside the shelter, staring at the doors. People were going in and out, carrying bags like mine. Their faces looked tired, older than they probably were. For a moment, I almost turned back. I didn't want to admit that I belonged here. But I had no choice. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and old clothes. A woman at the desk looked up at me. "First time?" she asked. I nodded, unable to speak. She handed me a form. "Fill this out. You'll get a bed and a locker. Showers are down the hall. Dinner is at 6. That was it. No questions about who I was. No concern for my story. Just paperwork and rules. I sat on a bench and filled out the form with shaking hands. Name, Colton Reed. Address, none. Emergency contact, none. When I handed the form back, she gave me a small key on a string. Locker 37. Don't lose it. I walked to the dorm room. Rows of metal beds lined the walls, each with a thin mattress and a gray blanket. Some people were sleeping, some were staring at the ceiling, some just sat quietly like their minds had given up. I dropped my garbage bag beside the bed and sat down. The springs creaked under my weight. For the first time in my life, I realized I was completely alone. The first night in the shelter was the hardest. I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to people snore, cough, or mutter in their sleep. Every sound reminded me I was surrounded by strangers, but at the same time, I had never felt more alone. I kept thinking about my room back at the Reed house. The beige walls, the plain furniture, the silence. It had never felt like home, but at least it was mine. Now even that was gone. At dinner they served soup and bread. The soup was watery and the bread was dry, but I ate every bite because I didn't know when I'd eat again. Around me, people shoveled food into their mouths quickly, as if afraid someone might take it away. Some looked rough, faces lined, clothes torn, eyes empty. Others looked almost normal, like people you'd pass on the street without guessing they had nowhere to sleep. I realized I was one of them now. The next morning, I woke up early. A volunteer handed me a small bag with a razor, a toothbrush, and a bar of soap. "Keep yourself clean," he said. "Makes it easier to find work." His words stuck with me. If I was going to survive, I couldn't let myself sink. I found a bathroom sink and washed my face with cold water. The mirror was cracked, but I could still see my reflection. Brown hair, tired eyes, a face that looked older than yesterday. I shaved carefully with a cheap razor. My skin burned after, but at least I looked human. Days turned into weeks. I learned the rules quickly. Breakfast at 7, dinner at 6. Beds had to be cleared by 8 every morning. If you wanted to shower, you had to do it fast before the hot water ran out. I washed my clothes in the sink, hanging them to dry on the end of my bed. I wore the same 2 shirts over and over. I tried to keep working at the garage. My boss, Mr. Jennings, was kind enough to let me keep my job, but it wasn't enough. I worked 30 hours a week, saving every dollar I could. But between bus fares, food that wasn't from the shelter, and the little fees that came up, my savings didn't grow much. College felt like a dream slipping away. Some nights I sat on the library steps downtown. It was quiet there, and the security guards didn't bother you as long as you looked clean. I would fill out job applications on paper or use the public computers, but most of the time no one called back. Who wants to hire a kid with no address? Still I kept moving. I told myself every morning, don't give up. I thought about the Reeds. Were they renting out my room already? Did Beverly really erase me from her life that fast? Probably. To them, I had always been temporary. But somewhere inside me, a small voice said I was meant for more than this. I didn't know it yet, but that small voice was right. My life was about to change again, this time in a way I never could have imagined. It was a Tuesday afternoon about 3 months after I left the Reed house. I was sitting on the steps outside the Dallas Public Library, the same spot I used most days. The concrete was hard, but it was quiet and I could sit there without anyone asking questions. I had a folder with me, job applications, rejection letters, notes about places that might be hiring. Most of them wanted an address I didn't have. The sun was hot on my shoulders when I noticed a man walking toward me. He wasn't like the others I usually saw downtown. No ragged clothes, no nervous eyes. He wore a gray suit, sharp and clean, and walked like he knew exactly where he was going. My first thought was cop. My second was social worker. Both meant trouble. He stopped in front of me. "Colton Reed?" he asked. My stomach clenched. Hearing my name from a stranger made me want to run. But I was tired of running. I nodded slowly. "Depends who's asking." The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a wallet, flipping it open to show an ID card. "My name is Vincent Morales. I'm a private investigator." He handed me a business card, thick paper, embossed letters, the kind that cost money. Real money. "I've been looking for you," he said. The words didn't make sense. Who would be looking for me? Nobody had ever looked for me before. I had been disposable to the Reeds, invisible to the world. "Your biological father hired me years ago," Vincent explained, sitting down beside me on the concrete like he didn't care about his fancy suit getting dirty. "He wanted to find you. It took me a long time, but I finally did." I stared at him. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Biological father. 2 words I had stopped letting myself think about years ago. Then Vincent's expression changed, softer, almost careful. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this way," he said quietly. "But he passed away last week. Heart attack. He was still searching for you when it happened." The world tilted again. For months I had dreamed about someone, anyone, coming to find me. And now someone had, but he was gone before I ever saw him. Vincent pulled out a tablet and swiped to a photo. He handed it to me. I froze. The man on the screen looked like me, only older. Same brown eyes. Same jawline. A little stronger, more confident, but familiar in a way that made my chest ache. He was standing in front of a tall glass building. The sign read Brennan Oil Industries. "That's your father," Vincent said. "Theodore Brennan. CEO and founder. He never married. No other kids. He spent 18 years trying to find you." I felt my throat tighten. Why did he give me up then? Vincent pulled out another photo, this one old and grainy, a young man barely older than I was, holding a baby in his arms. He was 22. "Your mother, Emily, died giving birth. He was young, scared, and his parents convinced him you'd be better off with a stable couple." He signed the papers. He regretted it a week later. I clenched my fist. A week? He regretted it in a week, and it took him 18 years to find me? "He tried," Vincent said gently. "But the Reeds, they blocked him. He even offered them money, 10 times more than the state was paying. They refused. They wanted the checks." Anger burned hot inside me. Beverly and Harold had known. They had known all along that someone out there wanted me, someone had been looking for me, and they hid it. For the first time, I realized the Reeds hadn't just taken money. They had stolen 18 years of my life. Vincent must have seen the storm in my eyes, because he didn't press me with more questions. Instead he said, "There's something else. We need to go to a lawyer's office. Your father left instructions." I almost laughed. A lawyer? Instructions? I was sitting there in worn-out shoes with $47 left to my name. What could a lawyer possibly want with me? But Vincent's face was serious, and something about the way he said, "your father," made me stand up and follow him. His car was parked at the curb, a sleek black sedan that smelled of leather and coffee. I sank into the seat, feeling like I had stepped into another world. The air conditioning hummed softly. Classical music played on the radio. It was so far from the buses and shelter halls I was used to that I couldn't speak for a while. We drove into downtown Dallas, toward a building I had walked past dozens of times but never entered. A skyscraper with mirrored glass, towering above everything. We rode the elevator up to the 40th floor. My stomach churned the whole way. A woman in a navy suit met us in a conference room with walls of glass. She introduced herself as Miss Chin, an attorney. She shook my hand firmly and said, "Mr. Reed, I'm sorry for your loss." Mr. Reed. Nobody had ever called me that in such a formal, respectful tone. I almost corrected her, but I stayed quiet. She placed a large envelope on the table. My heart thudded as I saw my father's name written across it in shaky handwriting. "This was written by your father the morning he died," Miss Chin said. "He asked that it be given to you directly. My hands trembled as I tore open the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small brass key with an address tag. The letter was long, 3 pages, covered in rushed handwriting. I read the first line and felt my throat close up. My son, if you're reading this, then I failed to find you in time, but at least you've been found. Your mother was Emily, the love of my life. She died giving birth to you. I was young, scared, and weak. My parents convinced me you'd be better off with another family. I regretted it within a week. I spent the last 18 years trying to undo that mistake. I had to stop reading. My vision blurred and I blinked hard, but the words stayed. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. Miss Chin gently slid a box of tissues across the table. I wiped my eyes and kept going. The key opens a vault at the address written below. Inside is everything I collected for you, every birthday gift I bought, every letter I wrote but couldn't send. The fortune I leave behind is not just money. It is 18 years of apologies in the only language I had left. Welcome home, son. I stared at the brass key shining under the conference room lights. A vault? Gifts? Letters? I didn't know what to say. Then Miss Chin spoke again. There is also the matter of his estate. Mr. Brennan left everything to you. I looked up, confused. Everything? She nodded. Brennan Oil Industries. 4 homes across Texas, all fully paid. A private island off the Gulf Coast. Liquid assets. Investments. In total, about $120 million. The room went silent. I couldn't breathe. A week ago, I was just a kid with a garbage bag. Now I was being told I was one of the wealthiest young men in Texas. I shook my head. This doesn't make sense. He didn't even know me. Vincent put a hand on my shoulder. He knew enough. You were his son. That was all he needed. 2 days later, Vincent drove me to the address written on the brass key. It wasn't what I expected. From the outside, it looked like just another warehouse in Houston's industrial district. Gray walls, no windows, no sign. But the security was heavy. We passed through 3 locked gates before reaching the inside. When the final door opened, I froze. The room looked like a museum dedicated to someone I didn't know, but somehow belonged to me. Every wall was covered with files, binders, and photographs. The air smelled faintly of old paper and dust. Vincent touched my arm. This is your father's vault. Everything he collected during the search. I stepped forward slowly, my heart racing. On one wall, I saw hundreds of documents, private investigator reports, legal letters, even newspaper clippings. Some were circled in red ink with the words, "Is this him?" scribbled in the margin. My name popped up over and over. Honor roll announcements, car repair articles, even a tiny school yearbook photo I didn't know existed. He had been following my life from a distance. He had been so close. In the center of the room were stacks of wrapped boxes. Birthday gifts. 18 of them, each labeled with my age. I reached out with shaking hands and picked one up. A small toy fire truck. The note taped to it said, "Every boy should have a truck. Age 4. My throat burned. Another box held a baseball glove. Age 9. I would have taught you how to catch. Then I saw a set of car keys attached to a tag. Age 16. Your first car, a Mustang. Just like your mother loved. The weight of it hit me all at once. He had been planning my life even though he couldn't be in it. For every year Beverly had handed me a generic card or socks, Theodore had been buying something real, something thoughtful, something filled with love I never received. On a desk in the corner, stacks of letters were organized by date. I picked one at random. The paper was yellowed slightly at the edges. The handwriting was careful. Colton, you're 13 today. I wonder if you like science. I loved chemistry at your age before I discovered petroleum engineering. I hope someone is teaching you to throw a curveball. I hope someone tells you they're proud of you. I am, even from afar. I bought your school photo today. You look serious, thoughtful. You ground me. You remind me why I'm building this. All of this is for you. My chest tightened and I had to sit down. The letter shook in my hands as tears blurred the words. Then Vincent pulled a small USB drive from a folder. This is labeled Final Message, he said softly. We plugged it into a laptop on the desk. My father's face filled the screen. His eyes were tired, but his voice was steady. "Colton," he said. "Tomorrow I fly to Dallas. You turn 18. I'm taking you to dinner. Somewhere nice. With chocolate cake. I never got to see you blow out candles. I have 18 years of wishes saved up. All of them are the same: bring my boy home." The timestamp read March 12, 11:47 p.m. He died 6 hours later. I couldn't move after watching that video. My father's voice echoed in the quiet vault, and I felt like time had stopped. He had been so close. Just 2 days before my birthday, he was making plans to meet me, buying a plane ticket, imagining us at a table with chocolate cake. I pressed my hands to my face and let out a sound I didn't recognize. It was grief, anger, and longing all mixed together. Vincent let me sit there for a while without saying anything. Finally, he slid a folder across the desk. "You need to see this too." I opened it. Inside were letters, emails, and legal papers. At the top of one page, bold and underlined, were the words, "Failed adoption recovery, Reed family." My heart pounded as I read. 3 years ago, my father had finally found me. He knew I was with Beverly and Harold. He had written them letters, begged them to let him contact me. He even showed up at the house once. But Beverly had responded with lawyers. She threatened harassment charges. She filed for a restraining order. She made sure he could never reach me. There was one email that made my blood boil. Beverly had written to his lawyer, "Mr. Brennan's contact attempts are disruptive to our family structure. Colton is thriving in our care and does not need confusion from a biological parent. Any further attempts will result in legal action. The subsidies we receive are irrelevant and should not be considered motivation." Irrelevant. She had written that while cashing checks with my name on them. My fists clenched so tight my knuckles hurt. She had known. She had known that someone out there wanted me, desperately wanted me, and she hid it just to keep the money flowing. Vincent's voice broke through my thoughts. "He tried everything, Colton. He spent millions on lawyers, investigators, even lobbyists to change the law. But the Reeds blocked every attempt." I thought back to the years I had begged Beverly to tell me about my birth parents. Every time she shut me down with cold words. "They couldn't care for you. We stepped up. That's all you need to know." She had looked me in the eye and lied while stuffing the truth in a folder like this one. I picked up another document from the stack. It was a photo, me at 16 standing outside the garage where I worked. The picture had been taken from a distance. In the margin, written in my father's handwriting, were the words, "My boy. Almost found him." My chest ached as I stared at that photo. All those times I thought I was invisible, he had been watching from the shadows, held back by threats and laws. He had been there, closer than I ever imagined, but Beverly and Harold had made sure I never knew. I slammed the folder shut. "They stole my father from me," I whispered. "They stole 18 years. And in that moment, I made myself a promise. The Reeds might have thought they won, but I was going to make sure the world knew what they really were." When I left the vault that night, the sky over Houston was dark and heavy, but inside me something had started to burn. For 18 years I had lived as a paycheck, a contract, a line in Beverly's ledger. Now I knew the truth. I had been wanted all along. My father had spent his entire life searching for me. And the Reeds had stolen that from both of us. Vincent drove me back to Dallas in silence. I sat in the passenger seat holding the brass key in my pocket, my fingers pressing into the grooves like it was the only solid thing I had. The streets we passed looked the same as they always had: gas stations, strip malls, neon signs glowing in the night. But everything felt different. For the first time, I had proof that I wasn't nothing. The next morning, Vincent picked me up again. "We need to go back to Miss Chin," he said. "Your father's estate has to be explained to you." The thought made my stomach twist. Estate. Money. Houses. Those words didn't fit with the boy who had just been thrown out with a garbage bag. We met in the same glass-walled conference room high above the city. Miss Chin greeted me politely, then opened a thick folder. "Colton," she said, "your father left everything in your name. The value of Brennan Oil Industries alone is $91 million. In addition, there are 4 properties across Texas, all fully paid off. A private island off the Gulf Coast named after you. Various investments totaling around $30 million more. Altogether, The estate is valued at over $120 million. I stared at her. The numbers were so big they didn't even feel real. 120 million? Less than a year ago I was counting every dollar in my wallet. Beverly had kicked me out with nothing. And now this woman was telling me I was one of the wealthiest young men in Texas. My throat went dry. Why would he leave all this to me? Because you're his son, she said simply. He had no other children. No wife. You were everything to him. I shook my head. But he didn't even know me. What if I turn out bad? What if I waste it? Vincent leaned forward. He knew you well enough, Colton. He knew you were worth it. He never doubted you. I dropped my face into my hands. It was too much. Just weeks ago, I had begged Beverly for a week of shelter. I had stood in a kitchen asking if she had ever thought of me as her son. And she told me flatly we met the terms. Now here I was, being told that another parent, one I had never met, had loved me so much he left me everything he had. It wasn't the money that broke me. It was the love behind it. For the first time in my life I had been chosen. A week later, Vincent drove me to one of the houses my father had left behind. It wasn't like the Reed house with its beige walls and second-hand furniture. This place was alive. It was large but not empty, filled with things that showed personality, shelves stacked with books, framed photos of landscapes, paintings that carried color and warmth. This was Theodore's main home, Vincent said quietly as we walked through the front door. I stepped inside and froze. The air smelled faintly of cologne and leather. On a side table sat a pair of glasses, folded neatly on top of an open book. A bookmark rested halfway through. My chest tightened. It felt like he had just stepped out of the room and could walk back in at any moment. I walked slowly down the hallway, running my fingers across the walls. Every corner had a piece of him. A jacket draped over a chair. Papers scattered on a desk with handwritten notes. A framed photo of an oil rig standing proud against the Texas sky. Vincent followed me but gave me space. He didn't say anything as I moved into the study. The desk was piled with files, adoption law reforms, notes about foster care systems, even highlighted passages about children's rights. My father had been fighting for me even in his work. On the bookshelf were binders labeled by year. I pulled one out. Inside were reports from investigators, receipts, letters he had written to lawyers. It was overwhelming. He hadn't just thought of me occasionally, he had made me his mission. I sat in the leather chair behind the desk and found a photo frame turned face down. I lifted it. It was a picture of me, maybe 12 years old, taken from a distance at school. My father had kept it on his desk the whole time. Even though he couldn't reach me, he kept me close in the only way he could. Tears burned my eyes. For years I had begged Beverly for a photo on the wall, some proof that I mattered in their house. She never gave me one. And here, in a home I had never lived in, my face was already waiting. Later, Vincent showed me the other properties. A ranch outside Austin. A house by the water in Galveston. Another quiet retreat near Houston. And then he told me about the island. He called it Colton Island, Vincent said. He bought it when you turned 10. I stared at him in disbelief. He named an island after me? Vincent smiled faintly. Yes. He filled the house there with things he thought you might like. Sports gear, fishing rods, books. He wanted to be ready for any version of you. That night, lying in the big bed in my father's house, I couldn't sleep. For so long I had been told I was nothing more than a cost, an obligation. But here was proof that someone had believed I was worth everything. And as the thought sank in, I realized something. The Reeds hadn't just stolen my childhood. They had tried to steal my identity. But my father had given it back to me. The first few weeks living in my father's house felt unreal. Every morning I woke up expecting to see the gray walls of the shelter, the thin blanket, the smell of disinfectant. Instead, I opened my eyes to a warm room filled with books and sunlight, a bed that felt too big for one person. But the weight of what I had inherited pressed down on me. $91 million in a company, houses across Texas, an island with my name on it. I didn't even know how to write a check over $100, and now lawyers and accountants were calling me Mr. Brennan. I spent hours in my father's study reading his notes. He had been obsessed with adoption law. His files were filled with highlighted articles, legal challenges, and speeches he had drafted about protecting children in foster care. One line he underlined 3 times: "No child should ever feel like a transaction." Those words cut deep. That was exactly what the Reeds had turned me into. I realized the money wasn't just money. It was his fight. It was 18 years of searching, of trying, of refusing to give up. If I was going to honor him, I couldn't just spend it on myself. I had to continue what he started. One evening, Vincent and I sat at the kitchen table. He had become more than just the investigator who found me. He was now the closest thing I had to family. "What are you going to do with all of this?" he asked. I looked at the papers spread out in front of me: bank statements, company records, property deeds. "I don't want it to just sit here," I said. "I know what it's like to be thrown out at 18 with nowhere to go. I want to make sure no other kid ends up like me." Vincent leaned back in his chair. "Your father would like that." The idea grew inside me. At first it was just a thought. Maybe I could donate to the shelter where I stayed. But the more I thought about it, the bigger it became. I didn't want to just give money away. I wanted to build something. A foundation that could help kids who age out of foster care. Housing, education, jobs, things that give them a real chance. The next day I told Miss Chin. She smiled. "That's exactly the kind of decision your father hoped you would make." That night, I stood in front of the mirror in my father's bedroom. I didn't see the boy Beverly had dismissed with a garbage bag. I didn't see the invisible kid who blended into beige walls. I saw Theodore's son. Someone who had been loved, even from a distance. Someone who had been chosen. The Reeds had turned my life into numbers. But now I had the power to turn those numbers into something real. And I knew exactly where to start. The first place I went was back to the shelter. It felt strange walking through those doors again, not as a boy clutching a garbage bag, but as someone with the power to change things. The same woman sat at the front desk. She looked up, ready to hand me another form, but stopped when she recognized me. "Colton?" she asked, surprised. I nodded. "Yeah. I stayed here a few months ago." Her face softened. "I remember. You kept your bed neat. Always shaved. Most kids your age don't last here." I glanced around the lobby. The smell of disinfectant was the same. The tired faces of people waiting for beds were the same. I saw a boy sitting where I had once sat, holding a plastic bag like it was all he had. I felt my chest tighten. That had been me not long ago. I pulled an envelope from my jacket and placed it on the counter. "This is for the shelter," I said. "Use it to make things better here. Hot meals, clean blankets, whatever's needed." The woman's eyes widened when she saw the number on the check. "Colton, this is more than our yearly budget." "Then no one here should ever go hungry again," I said quietly. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my father's house, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the boy with the plastic bag. There were thousands like him. Kids aging out of foster care, turned away because they no longer brought in checks. Kids who felt worthless because people like Beverly and Harold treated them like numbers. The next morning I called Miss Chin. "I want to set up a foundation," I told her. "For kids who age out of the system. Housing, food, schooling, jobs. Real support, not just a pamphlet to a shelter." She didn't hesitate. "We can make that happen." I named it the Theodore Brennan Foster Foundation. It felt right. His name deserved to be tied to something that gave life, not something that took it. Within months, we opened the first transitional home for foster kids who turned 18. Not a shelter with thin mattresses, but a real house with warm meals, tutors, and mentors. I visited one afternoon and saw kids sitting around a table laughing over pizza. Their photos already hung on the walls. I swallowed hard, remembering the blank beige walls of the Reed house, where no photo of me was ever allowed. One boy, Marcus, 7 years old, handed me a crayon drawing. "Thank you for my family," he said. "They read me stories every night." I took the drawing home and placed it on my father's desk, right next to his glasses. For the first time in my life, I felt like the cycle had been broken. The Reeds had cashed checks. My father had spent years searching. And now I finally knew what I was meant to do. Take all the love that had been stolen from me and give it to kids who needed it most. I told myself for months that I didn't need to see them again. Beverly and Harold had made their choice when they pushed a garbage bag into my hands and pointed me toward a shelter. But the more my life changed, the more I built in my father's name, the more I realized I couldn't move forward without looking back. So one afternoon, I drove to the address Vincent had quietly given me. The Reeds had sold the house and moved into a cramped apartment on the rough side of Dallas. The building had bars on the windows, peeling paint on the doors, and a broken security gate hanging open. I parked out front, sat there for a long time, then finally forced myself out of the car. I knocked. Beverly opened the door. She looked thinner, her gray hair pulled back tightly, her face lined with stress. She didn't look surprised to see me. She just stared for a moment, then said, "We gave you what you needed." Her voice was flat like always. But now it carried something else too, defeat. I stepped inside without asking. The apartment smelled of stale food and cleaning supplies. The beige order of the old house was gone, replaced with clutter and unpaid bills stacked on the counter. Harold shuffled out from the back, moving slower than I remembered, dark circles under his eyes. I turned to Beverly. "No," I said. "You gave me what the state paid you to give. Food. Shelter. Nothing more. You never gave me love." She crossed her arms. "We never hit you. Never starved you. We met our obligations." My laugh came out sharp. "Obligations? Do you know what my father gave me? He spent 18 years searching for me. He never gave up. He built an empire and left me everything, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because I was his son. You never saw me as that. You saw me as a check." Harold finally spoke. His voice was weaker than I had ever heard it. "We heard about the inheritance, Colton. If you could see your way to helping us out." He looked down at the floor. "We did raise you for 18 years. The audacity made my chest tighten, but I didn't feel rage anymore. Only pity." I pulled in a long breath. "You raised me for $324,000 in subsidies. By my calculation, you've been paid in full." Beverly's lips pressed together, her eyes cold, but for the first time, I saw something beneath the ice, fear. I stepped back toward the door. "The difference between you and my father is simple. You cashed checks. He gave me love I hadn't even earned. And because of him, other kids won't go through what I did. That's my family now. Not you." Neither of them said a word as I left. The door closed behind me with a dull click. I walked away lighter than I had in years, as if that final lock had broken and the past no longer held me prisoner. A few weeks later, Vincent suggested we visit the island. At first, I didn't want to. The thought of stepping into a place my father had built for me but never shared felt too painful. But part of me knew I needed to see it. I needed to understand just how much he had prepared, even when I didn't know he existed. We flew in on a small plane, the kind that rattles when the wind shifts. As we descended, I saw it below us, a strip of green surrounded by blue water, the waves catching sunlight like broken glass. The pilot pointed. "That's Colton Island." Hearing my name attached to a place like that made my throat tighten. The plane landed on a small runway cut into the trees, and we drove a short distance to the house my father had built. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't designed to impress. It was simple, wooden, with wide porches that looked out over the water. Inside, though, every room was filled with things he thought I might want. Fishing rods leaned against the wall. Sports gear lined the shelves, baseball bats, soccer balls, a basketball hoop out back. There were stacks of books on every subject, from science to history to novels. He hadn't known what kind of person I would become, so he prepared for every possibility. In one room, a car magazine lay open on the desk, a sticky note stuck to the page. "Maybe he'll love cars like I do." Next to it sat a set of keys, my first car still waiting in storage. I walked through the room slowly, touching everything. My chest felt heavy, but not with anger this time, with something like belonging. For the first time, I felt like I had stepped into a place that was meant for me. That evening, I sat on the dock with a fishing rod. The sun dipped low, painting the water orange and pink. I didn't care if I caught anything. Just holding the rod he had chosen for me, sitting in a spot he had built for us, felt like being closer to him. Vincent sat nearby, quiet. He didn't need to say anything. I thought about all the nights I had spent in the shelter, lying awake, wondering if anyone in the world cared about me. And here was proof that someone had not only cared, but had built an entire world waiting for me. When the stars came out, I whispered into the night, "I made it, Dad. I'm here." The waves answered back with a gentle rhythm like a heartbeat. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was alone. Taking over Brennan Oil felt like stepping into another universe. One week I was filling out job applications on library steps, and the next I was sitting in a boardroom where people wore suits that probably cost more than everything I owned combined. At first, I didn't even try to speak. I just listened, my hands clenched under the table, pretending to take notes while my heart pounded. They talked about assets, dividends, percentages, things I barely understood. I felt like an imposter in a place I didn't belong. But then I remembered what Vincent told me. My father didn't build this empire because he wanted wealth, he built it because he wanted me to have a future. That thought gave me courage, enough to keep showing up, enough to start asking questions, enough to learn. The board members surprised me. I expected them to look at me like I was a kid out of his depth, but instead they treated me like Theodore's son. Some of them had known him for decades, and when they spoke about him, their voices softened. They told me stories about how every meeting somehow ended with him asking about me, about whether the company was strong enough to fund the next search. They laughed gently when they admitted that Brennan Oil had been, in their eyes, less of a company and more of a massive machine built for one purpose, to find me. And sitting there, hearing that, I realized this wasn't about proving I was smart enough to lead. It was about carrying forward the reason my father had built everything in the first place. At the same time, the foundation was taking shape. What began as an idea in my head turned into something real. Lawyers drew up the paperwork, accountants moved money into trust funds, and soon the first transitional home opened. Walking inside was like stepping into the life I wished I'd had. Bright walls, soft couches, photos of smiling kids already hanging on the walls. No beige silence. No calculators on the table. Just warmth. One night, I sat with a group of teens there, eating pizza while they argued over music and laughed at jokes I barely understood. Their voices filled the house with something I hadn't known growing up. Family. Vincent shifted his role too. He stopped being just the investigator who found me and became the one who searched for others. Together, we reunited 12 families in the first year. I stood back during those reunions, watching mothers and children collapse into each other's arms, watching years of distance close in seconds. Every time I thought of my father and the birthday dinner that never came. And every time I told myself that giving others the ending he never got was the closest I could come to giving it back to him. At night, when the weight of all of it pressed on me, the company, the foundation, the kids, I sat in his study. His glasses still rested on a book he never finished. His notes about adoption law still covered the desk. I talked to him there out loud like he was across from me. I told him about the meetings, the homes we were opening, the families we were reuniting. And every time before I turned off the light, I whispered the only thing I needed him to know. I hope I'm making you proud, Dad. Some nights I still see myself standing in that kitchen, Beverly with her calculator, Harold staring at the floor, the garbage bag waiting by the wall. For so long I believed that was family, silence, obligations, numbers. But now, when I wake up in my father's house, surrounded by his books, his notes, his love stitched into every corner, I know the truth. Family isn't a contract. Love isn't a deal. I visited them one last time. Their apartment was small, dark, and heavy with regret. Beverly tried to act strong, but her eyes flickered with fear. Harold barely looked at me. They asked me for money as if 18 years of cashing checks wasn't enough. I didn't feel anger, just pity. I told them the truth. They had already been paid in full. Then I walked out and never looked back. Later, I sat on the dock of the island my father named after me. The fishing rod he bought leaned against my chair. The waves tapped against the wood like a heartbeat. I whispered into the night, "I made it, Dad. I'm here." Sometimes I dream about the birthday dinner he planned. In those dreams he makes it. We sit together, strangers with the same eyes, chocolate cake between us. He tells me he's sorry. I tell him I understand. We both say the words we never got to share, "I love you." And then I wake up, holding on to his video, his voice reminding me that love never stopped searching. He never got to bring me home. But because of him, I finally found one. I'm home now, Dad. I finally made it home.